Would you let David know that I've been called away?
Of course, Mr. Fring. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Hey, what is up? So for this video, I actually want to talk about an extremely ambiguous and thought-provoking scene that was displayed to us in the previous episode of Season 6 of Better Call Saul entitled Fun and Games. And so, following this episode, I saw a lot of fan intrigue online in regards to what was the meaning behind this very cryptic scene of Gus Fring that encompassed the entire second act of the previous episode. And so, just to get right into this one, following Gus Fring returning home from a day of work and him opening up the blinds, a symbolic gesture of him finally being able to decompress now that the threat of Lalo Salamanca had been effectively neutralized. Then, following this, we see him meeting with Mike Ehrmantraut, where he gets a lowdown of what happened with Saul and Kim, where in the grand scheme of things, Mike tells Gus that it's all effectively over. This whole ordeal can now be put behind them. This is, of course, then immediately followed by Gus Fring stating to Mike, how soon can you start construction again on the Super Lab? Following Mike saying he would have to find a new crew, Gus then tells Mike to start looking for a new crew immediately. And so then following this, the very next act in this episode then picks up with a very interesting continuation of Gus Fring at a wine bar. And again, without trying to get into every single specific piece of dialogue that was displayed to us in this scene, in the grand scheme of things, we see Gus Fring order a glass of wine, which is then followed by a very cordial conversation that he has with the bar sommelier named David. Again, we can see Gus Fring appearing to enjoy himself, engaging in this casual conversation with this wine expert, and of course then following David leaving the conversation momentarily because he wants to show Gus Fring a very special bottle of wine. Following David leaving and going to fetch this wine, we then see Gus Fring sitting at the bar, having a brief moment of introspection where he then tells the bartender to tell David that he has been called away. He then pays for his glass of wine, leaves the bar, and thus this scene ends Act 2. And so while I talked about in my live stream review for this episode, while there's absolutely no way of knowing what is going on in Gus Fring's head during this scene, if I had to sum up the scene just based on the context of him talking with Mike in the previous act, just my interpretation of Gus Fring's character is that he is so myopically and single-mindedly focused on his revenge against the cartel and the Salamancas, which of course incorporates him building the super lab that we saw in the plot of Breaking Bad. So he has a means of production on the north side of the border completely separate from the cartel. I just think that irrespective of Gus Fring's personal life here, of whether or not this sort of relationship he has with this man David is purely platonic or otherwise, as the creator of Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad, Vince Gilligan himself said that in his interpretation, Gus Fring and Max Arciniega, the man who was the business partner of Gus Fring, who was shot in the head by Hector Salamanca, and is thus the entire reason for Gus Fring's revenge against the cartel. Whether or not, like Vince Gilligan, you think that Gus and Max were more than just business partners, and to quote Vince Gilligan himself, probably lovers, irrespective of whatever sort of relationship Gus Fring wants to have with another individual here, I just really think that this moment of introspection just made Gus Fring remind himself that he truly has to be completely devoted and completely celibate and myopically focused on this revenge, where he doesn't even have time to engage in these small-time cordialities that have nothing to do with this plot of revenge. And interestingly, if we go over the course of the plot of Breaking Bad as well as the plot of Better Call Saul, we really haven't seen Gus Fring outside of his business life as a part of the cartel or as a part of his legitimate means of the business, working at his Los Pollos Hermanos restaurants. And every real event that he undertakes over the course of these two series, even if there's some social aspect to them, such as the scene that ASAC Merkert said to Hank and Steve Gomez in the episode entitled Live Free or Die, where Gus Fring went over to his house once where they had a cookout.
All night we were laughing, telling stories, drinking wine. And he's somebody else completely. Right in front of me. Right under my nose.
Again, in the grand scheme of things, while this is a somewhat social event for Gus Fring, it's definitely in the context of him establishing a relationship with the DEA, which of course in the grand scheme of things still has to do with his revenge against the cartel and the Salamancas. But this scene here of him in the wine bar was truly just a very rare moment into the personal life of Gus Fring that was in no way affiliated with his reason for being of revenge against the cartel and the Salamancas. So again, while this is of course just my opinion of the scene, and anyone else watching the scene can have a different opinion, absolutely. And again, while the dialogue in this scene displayed to us that Gus Fring frequented this bar, maybe to decompress from time to time, I just really feel like maybe just following everything that happened with Lalo Salamanca, while he maybe wanted to decompress for a moment, he just reminded himself of the fact that he really doesn't have time for this, and while the threat of Lalo Salamanca is now effectively neutralized, this now means he can continue this plot of revenge against the cartel and the Salamancas, which of course means finishing the construction on the super lab. And so, moving forward in the plot of Season 6 of Better Call Saul, to tell you the truth, now following us effectively entering the Breaking Bad timeline, I do find myself wondering, is this going to be the very last scene that we see of Gus Fring in the plot of Better Call Saul? And to tell you the truth, just based on the fact that the super lab has not been built, and the fact I don't think this is the final scene of Gus Fring's character by any stretch of the imagination with 4 episodes remaining, where I also think that his relationship to Mike Ehrmantraut during this 3-year period prior to Walter White entering the Albuquerque criminal underworld, in addition to Mike's relationship to Saul Goodman, in respect to Mike's relationship with Gus Fring also being displayed to us.
What you two need is an honest-to-God businessman, right? Somebody who treats your product like the simple, high-margin commodity that it is. Somebody who ships out of town, deals only in bulk, someone who's been doing this for 20 years and never been caught.
You know someone like that?
Let's just say I know a guy who knows a guy who knows another guy.
I just think this means that we will probably see the backstory of the super lab in the year 2005 and beyond, depending on how the timeline of Better Call Saul is manipulated additionally in these final 4 episodes, which I'm truly extremely eager to see displayed to us in the context of, did this wine scene really display to us that Gus Fring reminded himself that he really doesn't have time for anything else besides this myopic revenge?
Well, what's his name?
I have no idea. He's very low profile. He's careful like that. You know, from what I do hear about him, he sounds a little like you.
All right, that is all I really got for you guys on this one. As always, major thank you to everyone who watches and comments on these videos. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate it if you subscribe to this channel. The support would really mean a lot. Definitely let me know what you think about this scene in the comments section of this video and what was the symbolic meaning behind it. Really looking forward to discussing Better Call Saul in the days to come prior to the premiere of episode 610 on Monday. And as always, my name is Anton Jackson. Thank you again so much for watching this video.